A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I mentioned in my previous review video for Red River that I had intended to do these reviews earlier, but I haven't been feeling well most this week. I probably would have been done with this particular book earlier. Excuse me. If I hadn't had such a bad mast cell flare over the weekend. And if people saw my video on mast cell activation syndrome, that, hold on. Let me take a drink. There, that should help. If people saw my video on mast cell activation that I posted for June, they will have probably seen that at that time I was experiencing breakouts. Most of it's healed over, but breakouts and eye swelling. And that took a few days to come down. The eye is completely down now. I still have some healing breakouts, but I wasn't healing the way I normally do. I was just having, with the weather, a really bad flare-up of my mast cell activation syndrome. But right now, a lot of my reaction to the weather is just some jaw discomfort and stiffness, although some of that might be still my body recovering a certain extent from, I had some lymph node swelling around that area of the jaw, and I already have TMJ, plus the weather can make my muscles tight and stuff anyway, everything tight anyway, so I'm still recovering from some of that discomfort between the weather and just recovering with the TMJ from when I had the lymph nodes swollen here and all the other swelling going on. But anyway, so if my jaw gets a little bit tired, that might be why, but I'm mostly past a lot of the worst of it, knock on wood. I know that we have more weather coming in, and hopefully it won't get quite that bad again. I've not really had an immunological response quite in that way before. But anyway, this is a review for June's Journey with the Inklings. This is Beren and Luthien. I have been reading for June's Journey with the Inklings throughout the month of June. I just haven't posted a whole lot because I hadn't finished anything. I'm still reading The Fellowship of the Fellowship, the Literary Lives of the Inklings, Tolkien, Lewis, Owen Barfield, and Charles Williams. I've met Tolkien read through his introduction section. Same thing for Lewis. I'm in the section where they're introducing Owen Barfield. So, and I'm thus far through. Sorry. But that's carrying over for Big Book Summer for me. The review I have is actually for Beren and Luthien. And I've been wanting to read Beren and Luthien for quite a while. And I'm really delighted that I was able to read it this time. Part of what took me so long is I decided early on that I was going to read the lay part of Beren and Luthien, so the epic poetry parts, aloud. And if there was any parts that were just in normal prose, I would just read them like I would normally do prose. Now, it starts off with basic notes by Christopher Tolkien explaining why he put together the book the way he did. Some basic explanations of how the story changed over time with Tolkien just reworking the story over the years. How Beren started off as what he called the gnome, but that was Tolkien used that interchangeably for the Noldor elves. And he also he mentioned things like that. He mentioned the inspirations for the story for Tolkien. It mentions why he chose which aspects he did to add to the basic of the story that's seen in the Silmarillion. And by he, I mean Christopher, because Tolkien never really, I don't think Tolkien really ever completely finished Beren and Luthien to his liking. Like with a lot of Tolkien stuff, he was tweaking it almost, till his dying day. It's like he didn't quite want to let go of it. And I think that's, when you have a creative who's made such a world the way Tolkien did, that makes sense. It's kind of hard to let it go, especially if you're character-driven, or in Tolkien's case, he's world-driven / language-driven. A lot. If you read The Ring of Words, and I've mentioned this in a previous review for The Ring of Words, it's about Tolkien and his work on the Oxford English Dictionary. But the book mentions how a lot of Tolkien's creativity was driven by different words. And so I think that also kept Tolkien from really being at the point where, okay, the story, I'm done now. The way that words creatively spoke to him never was done. He's not primarily a plot-driven person. He was driven by his love of mythology, by his love of words. I had things that I had marked here. Let's see. I have mentioned here that the growth of Beren and Luthien through Tolkien's notes, and I'm going to quote it right here. In the history of Middle-earth, the development was seldom by outright rejection. Far more often, it was by subtle transformation in stages, so that the growth of the legends, the process, for instance, by which the Nargothrond story made contact with that of Beren and Luthien, a contact not even hinted at in the Lost Tales, though both elements were present, can seem like the growth of legends among peoples, the product of many minds and generations. And I think Tolkien would like that his work kind of reflects the natural growth of legends that we see over a longer stretch of time, naturally, but in, his stories over, of course, a much shorter period of time. But to think that Beren and Luthien can kind of hold that same process of seeing it grow and change with time. Yeah, the creation of an ancient legend of Middle-earth. It was Christopher Tolkien's hope that in composing this book, that it would show the creation of an ancient legend of Middle-earth, changing and growing over many years, and reflecting the search of the author for a presentation of the myth nearer to his desire. And actually, Christopher Tolkien does do a good job. You see the myth from its earliest beginnings of not even having Sauron present, but you have the King of Cats present and all the evil cats that you're dealing with. Although it is implied that the King of Cats is the one who's actually the true evil persona, not the other cats are kind of under his thraldom. But that's an aspect that doesn't make it to the end point of the Beren and Luthien story, but it was a part of the development of getting to that point. Some aspects stayed with the story, and others got lost to time and changed out for other aspects as Tolkien's world grew. Now, this part, and this will probably be one of the last direct quotes I'll give from Christopher Tolkien before he goes into the story proper. Beren and Luthien was always to Tolkien a reflection of his love story with his wife, Edith. I believe her name was Edith. I believe it's Edith. Hold on. Yes, Edith. But, so here I'm going to quote Christopher Tolkien. In a letter to me on the subject of my mother, written the year after her death, which was also the year before his own, he, J.R.R. Tolkien, wrote of his overwhelming sense of bereavement and of his wish to have Luthien inscribed beneath her name on the grave. He returned in that letter, as in that cited on page 29 of this book, to the origin of the tale of Beren and Luthien in a small woodland glade filled with hemlock flowers near Roos in Yorkshire, where she danced. And he said, "But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos." Which, so sad, so poignant. From what I understand, Edith and J.R.R. Tolkien's graves are marked, hers with Luthien, his with Beren, which is just so beautifully romantic. So one could argue that Beren and Luthien is almost like a legend, a love story to Edith in a way that a man that truly loved legend in words could best imagine by creating this whole wonderful romantic legend that reimagined in a different setting his love for her. This book is filled with the artwork of Alan Lee. This is back when you were still dealing with Televito, the King of Cats. My one regret with the way that these pictures are set up is they don't give any information of what's going on in the page, because sometimes what's in the page directly opposite doesn't always exactly match what is on the picture. So that is something that I wish had been provided in this book. Besides Alan Lee's full page plate picture, you also have smaller black and white pictures throughout. The prose as put together, whether directly from Tolkien's notes or kind of spliced together from his notes with Christopher Tolkien trying to give it as smooth of a feel as possible, that is very readable. It feels much like Silmarillion does, which makes sense because that's how Christopher Tolkien put together Silmarillion, from his father's notes, also piecing together everything as best he could. Now, the part that is the actual lay, the poetry, I very much enjoyed reading it aloud, especially as I allowed myself to get more into feeling the words as I was reading them, trying to match that with hand movements and just facial expressions, body movements, all that kind of thing. Just have it be a full, almost a performance just for me. So that made, especially the latter half when I really let myself get into it, that made it very enjoyable. But there were some points where Tolkien would choose to end a sentence which would feel awkward, where he might end in the middle of where I would have thought, let me see if I can, he'd end a sentence in the middle of a line. And so I wouldn't be sure, well, this would be normal where I'd pause and then start again, but it felt awkward in saying it aloud. And I wish that I could have heard Tolkien reading his own lay aloud. And I'm trying to find an example of what I'm speaking of. I want to say there's some very early on when we were dealing with the early form. Okay. This might be one. So this is dealing with Gorlam, who is the betrayer of Beren's father, Barahir. And this is, I think, an earlier form of that story, because I think you're still dealing with, they haven't yet called, Tolkien hasn't yet switched over to calling Sauron in this tale. He's still Thu. So you're not dealing with the King of the Cats anymore. And Beren is now a man and not an elf. But you haven't yet switched from Thu to Sauron yet. So you're in an in-between stage with this particular part of the lay. Thus men believed that Morgoth made the fiendish phantom that betrayed, so 2 lines, the soul of Gorlam, and so brought the lingering hope forlorn to naught, 2 lines, that lived amid the lonely wood, yet Beren had by fortune good, again 2 lines, long hunted far afield that day, and benighted in strange places lay, 2 lines, far from his fellows, in his sleep. You see, this one, I think, is where I ended up having some trouble, because, okay, so 1 line would be, like I said, benighted in strange places lay, and then be far from his fellows, that's period, in his sleep. But the way that the sentence ends, so you'd have, and benighted in strange places, but the sentence doesn't end until, or benighted in strange places lay, far from his fellows. So the way that that sentence doesn't end until the next line with far from his fellows, but still within that line, then you have to start a new sentence. In his sleep, next line is then, he felt a dreadful darkness creep. So it's like, sometimes where Tolkien would place a rhyme would be in the middle of a sentence, and so it just the way we match up. Sometimes I had to sit there and think about, okay, how do I pause when I'm saying this so it doesn't sound awkward, so it sounds like I'm still in the same line, but I still give the proper emphasis and the idea of what I'm reading. Because to say that better, how would I say that? So, thus men believed that Morgoth made the fiendish phantom that betrayed the soul of Gorlam, and so brought the lingering hope forlorn to naught, that lived amid the lonely wood, yet Beren had by fortune good long hunted far afield that day, and benighted in strange places lay, far from his fellows. In his sleep he felt a dreadful darkness creep upon his heart, and thought the trees. Okay, so I think maybe my problem is when I was reading this aloud a lot is I made too much of an emphasis upon the differences in lines. And maybe if I just read it less like one would lines of chant, more like straight on prose. I don't know. For those who actually read things like Beren and Luthien, the Lays of Beren and Luthien the Lays of Beren and Luthien aloud, or some people who read Beowulf aloud, how do you read it? Do you read it where you'll split the line? Like, as in, like, where you'll not split the line, do you read it that when the line changes, then you change the way you say it? So, like, would you go, this Garland died in bitter death and cursed himself with dying breath. So would you add a slight difference in your emphasis based off of you changing line, or would you just read it almost like you do prose? Then Gorlam died in bitter death and cursed himself with dying breath. And Barahir was caught and slain, and all good deeds were made in vain. So, because otherwise I would read this, thus Gorlam died a bitter death and cursed himself with dying breath. And Barahir was caught and slain, and all good deeds were made in vain. I'm not sure if you can really tell the difference in the way I'm reading it. I feel that if you read it more like poetry, as in like you emphasize more the lines versus the sentences, it can almost rob it of the meaning. I don't know. How do you read aloud things that kind of have an odd punctuation but are set up the way you would a lay, like the Lay of Beren and Luthien, like you might see Beowulf, some of the Arthurian legends when they're put to poetry? or to more of a lay format, because I'm beginning to see maybe the lays aren't just like your typical poetry where you might I wonder if something like the lays that are more in a legend format, like the way that people might told it at fireside, might be told differently than something like a Robert Frost poem like The Road Less Traveled By, where you definitely have more of a certain kind of meter, which, I don't know, it feels a little bit different than reading something like Beren and Luthien. Thoughts? I don't do a lot of poetry reading aloud. This was a very enjoyable experience. I look forward to, in the future, reading more of this style with Tolkien's work. I know that he probably has, with his translation of Beowulf, I think he has one that's one of the stories of the Volsungs, from the Volsung saga, and also I think some Arthurian legends, as well as his own work. So I look forward to perfecting that way of reading and developing more of my thoughts on how something like that should be read in comparison to how, like I said, something like The Road Less Traveled By would be read. Because I do think those things, in order to, they need to be read differently, that they are not the same thing, even though there are rhymes to both of them. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Beren and Luthien. I'm very glad that I have finally read this. It's well worth reading. I look forward to reading it again in the future, probably even to reading the lays again and getting even more out of them. Great story, beautiful story. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope that you have a very blessed day, and I will see you again for the next video. God bless. Bye.
Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.